Thanks, everyone. It's really good to see this turnout. And I'm very excited to talk to you today. And I'm going to talk to you about the team that I work on, which is called Google Crisis Response. And so sometimes say, oh, so you work on when there's a big crisis in data center, there's a network issue, the computers are crashing. No, actually, we deal with humanitarian crisis, like a crisis, for example, recently the typhoon in Yolanda, how to bring information in that type of situation. So the goal of this team is to make critical information more accessible in time of a disaster. What is very important in this situation is to have accurate information, and information that is relevant and credible. In particular, having a wrong information can be even more hurtful than having no information. So it's important to have the right information, to deliver it to people as fast as possible. When you're in a crisis situation, timing is very important. And finally, delivering it to people however you're connected, however you're finding information, could be through different products, through your phone, through your desktop, and using different type of standards. So since the team has been created in 2010, we've been responding to more than 45 crises around the world, and different type of crises. Big crisis, for example, is this Typhoon Yolanda in the Philippines that happened a few months ago that you certainly all heard of. But we also get involved in smaller crises in terms of localization. For example, after the Boston explosion, we got involved. Or more recently, this morning, there was an airplane that got lost, and that was from Malaysia Airlines. So right away, we got our team to be able to put critical information in front of people as soon as we can, like phone numbers for people to call if they're looking information about their family, or even for the public and for the media. But before I talk a little bit more about what we developed, I want to go back to how this team got started, because I think it reflects a lot of the spirit of Google. It actually all started in January 12, 2010, when there was a 6.9 magnitude earthquake that did strike Haiti, nearby Port-au-Prince, the capital, leading to the devastation that most of you certainly heard of. There was, unfortunately, 250,000 people got dead. The devastation in terms of infrastructure and for the country was huge. The first thing that we did at Google was update satellite imagery. So we started to do that even before the earthquake in Haiti, for example, for the Hurricane Katrina. So this is an example of satellite imagery that we get from our satellite provider, JOI, that is the picture of the golf course in Pétionville, which is not far from Port-au-Prince. That was before the earthquake. This is the same picture after the earthquake, and only one day after the earthquake. So we could update the satellite imagery in Google Earth in less than 24 hours after the earthquake. You can see in these pictures that people started to leave their house that was not sure anymore. There was a lot of aftershock at that time, and start to go on this golf course, which was a safe place to be. And then 13 days after the earthquake, that was one of the biggest camp where people went, and actually they were there for 1 or 2 years. So this golf course was not the only place where people went to after the earthquake. So there was a lot of small groups like this. So then you can imagine, when you think about technology, that just having this satellite imagery, you can do lots of analysis and trying to find automatically where are the groups and where people went. But at that time, we thought the devastation was so big that there's something else that we could do. We couldn't just stay here and do nothing. So we started first to put some maps together. So there was different organizations, like the Red Cross, for example, did put some medical facilities together. There was some damage assessment done. So a lot of data around. People were sending emails. There's some that were just linked in some website in different formats. But it was really hard for anyone to find that data. So we manually put together these maps, trying to put them in some specific standards that could be able to share with each other, putting it in a way that a lot of people could access the data without bringing down a server. So we created some of these maps. And then another big issue that happened at that time, and you might have remembered, was it was really hard to have news from people. I personally had family relatives, some relatives in Haiti, impossible to call them for like days and even weeks after. It was really hard to get in touch. And I was not the only one in this situation. There were a lot of people. So some people started to bring up some sites with lists of missing people. So it was replicated everywhere. Some sites just went down because too many people went on the site. So we started to brainstorm with some Googlers and say, how can we do something? Scaling is something we're good at Google. So we started a hackathon, simply trying to bring together all these databases, so trying to build an app that will bring all of these things together so that we can, if you search for someone, you can find it in one single place that will aggregate all the data from everywhere and open so that we could share it with also other applications. So we did a 72-hour hackathon with engineers from Google, from all over the world. We had people from Sydney in Australia. We had people from London, people from Tel Aviv in Israel, from the East Coast of the US, from the West Coast. There was like coding for 24 hours. And in 72 hours later, we launched the first version of Google Person Finder to allow disaggregation of data. So after this experience, mainly done by Googlers that just volunteer, they drop their main project saying that this is important to do, we thought there's so much that can be done with technology to help in situation of crisis. So we went to our funder, Sergey and Larry, and we told them, hey, there's something we can do here. Technology can help. Why don't we create a team of people, of engineers, to focus on this specific problem? And we created the Google Crisis Response team in the spring of 2010. So I want to present here what we learned so far and what we've been developing. So the first thing we did was, the first question we had was, but internet, does it even work during disaster? Because that's Google, that's what we know how to do, is how to use best the power of internet. So we started to study that. We're data-driven, so we started to look at data. This is a graph of the number of user query going to Google from Haiti. So you can see that it's high and then it drops on January 12, 2010. What is interesting here, it drops, but the red line, but the blue line doesn't completely drop to the bottom. There was still a little bit of internet. I remember 24 hours after the earthquake chatting with someone who was in an internet cafe. So there was a little bit. And then it took 4 months to go back to the internet traffic it was before the earthquake. If you take another example of a country that is very prepared for earthquake, this is Japan. So on March 11, 2011, there's this big magnitude 9 earthquake that I'm sure you all remember of. This is the graph. So this was an earthquake that happened in Japan, in Tohoku. This is the graph of the daily traffic to Google from Japan. And what you can see is that on March 11, the traffic stopped a little bit, but it didn't stop for that long. Like a few hours later, it was up. And so if people couldn't use their phone, they actually could use the internet. And so we know that from data. We also know that from users. And so this is Ruth, a user, a Google user in Tokyo that sent us a thank you email. And in an email, she explains that their desktop email system would not go through on March 11. Their phone SMS didn't go through. Their voice didn't go through, but Gmail connected them. They connected them in the company, but also within other people in Japan and people outside Japan. And it was not just Gmail. It was Facebook. It was Twitter. That was the entire internet that was up and running. You know, we can thank TCP/IP, who's highly, which is highly resilient. So there are some internet that's still here. So the next question we wonder was, but do people turn to the internet to find information? So we did some study. So this is the traffic of people using Google from Hawaii. And this is the number of requests for about tsunami, people searching information about tsunami. So you can see the spikes after big earthquake. The earthquake in February 2010 in Chile, and then the earthquake in March 2011 in Japan. So if we zoom in Japan on March 11, you can see here that there's no one searches information, very little about a tsunami. And then at 7:56 p.m., a tsunami warning was issued by the Pacific Tsunami Center. And you can see the spike. What is interesting here is the top of the spike here. So these are for people that are located in Hawaii that are impacted by the tsunami. The top of the spike represents 23% of the search queries on Google. 23% of people using Google at that time were searching information about the tsunami. So it's very important. So people turn to the internet and turn to Google to find information. So our role is to build some tools and to make all this information that is critical for these users available. And what are this information? What are the needs of people? Because say, okay, we're just gonna go and provide this information, but what do people need for? And that's a big challenge to understand. What people search for are often, how bad is the event? Do I need to evacuate? Do I need something? Am I impacted? Am I impacted now, or am I going to be impacted in 2 days? Where is my family? Where is my friend? Where are my friends? My kids? Where are the people that I was supposed to meet? Or what resources do I need? Do I need to go to a shelter? Do I need to pack up on water? Are we going to have a risk of power outages? So all of this information. So for that, we actually have people on our team go on the ground in different places and discuss with people to try to understand what are the needs to better define what tools we should build. And what we learned from that is that for any tool that we want to build, we have to follow these 3 principles. Simple, standard, and open. Simple, during a crisis, this is not the right time to learn a new UI, to sign up for a new account, to type some reCAPTCHA, all of that. And we might be laughing, but it's very important. And all of you who did some UI design or designing a simple UI is very complex. So that's something to keep in mind. And best is even if you can reuse a tool that people use every day, then they're going to know how to use it during a crisis situation. Finally, standard. Using standard to share your data. Collaboration is key during a disaster. People exchange information and work together. If everyone uses a different standard for their data, it's impossible to put all of this data together. So use standard as much as you can, and then open your system. Open your data. Make sure that everyone can access your data in terms of license, but also having an open API so you can exchange data between systems. Using open source is even better so that people can actually reuse what you're doing and understand what you're doing. So I'm going to give you an example of some tools that we built and why having something simple, standard, and open make them very useful. So I talked before about this Person Finder tool. So Person Finder is a very simple web application developed in Python on App Engine. It's open source, where you have 2 buttons. You have, I'm looking for someone. You want to have information about a person, or I have information about someone. Like you want to tell your friends that you're safe. So you click on a button, and then you have, if you're looking for someone, you type the name, and then you can have the list of the people that have been listed already in the database with different status. If you click on one of this link on John Doe, you have here a details page with the name of the person, descriptions that someone entered. So for example, here, I was looking for John Doe, and then there's Phil. I have no idea who is Phil, who also searching for the same person. When I finally have some news from John, then I'm going to update this page, and then Phil, who I have no idea who he is, and he doesn't know me, then we'll have that information too. So without knowing each other, we did exchange some information. So after the earthquake, oops, I forgot. So here, we have a data API. So why Person Finder was successful in different examples was that we have a data API that allows us to search, read, and write. So we can have different groups that have different lists of missing people, put them in the system, read them, and write. It implements a standard, PFIF, Person Finder Interchange Format. So if other application talks these standards, then we can exchange data. And then it's open source, and you can check out the code. When we launched Person Finder after the earthquake in Japan, 2 hours after the earthquake, it was initially used, people started to enter information directly on the tool. But we did a great use of the API, and here's an example. When the tsunami warning was issued, people pretty much just ran out of their home. You don't have time to grab your bag or whatever, you just run, and they went into shelters. And then people went into shelters, and they were looking for ways to tell their family that they're in this shelter and that they're fine. So they started writing on piece of papers and put that on the wall of the shelters. So they wrote their name, and there's the name also of the shelter, and etc. Then the few people that had a phone that access to the internet, they took a picture of these particular pieces and put them in a Picasso album on the web for everyone to see. Then, for every single picture, some volunteers from all over the world look at the picture and then transcribed, if you had to speak Japanese. And then they put the name of the shelter and below a list of names of people. And then what you can do, you can write a simple program that's like a for loop. You just look and say, if I see this name, check if it's in Person Finder. If it's in Person Finder, update that entry in Person Finder saying, I saw that name in this particular shelter, and link it to that particular photo. This way you can scale and do that a lot. And an output of that was that there was more than 9,000 pictures uploaded in this particular Picasso album. More than 1,000 people helped during the transcriptions, and 137,000 records in Person Finder were updated through that. And all of that is possible because we use a standard, so and an API, and it was open, and we could exchange data. You don't have to be part of Google Crisis Response to write this small tool that will do this upload and this update of Person Finder. So having something simple, standard, opens allow you this collaboration. Another tool that we work on is called Google Crisis Map. Some data that are crucial during a disaster are geodata. But they're all over the place. And they're in different format and in different sites. And how do you put all of them together? So we did create something called a crisis map. So maybe some people saw that in 2012 during Hurricane Sandy. We put a map together where you could see the forecast cone of the hurricane, what are the areas to evacuate, and all of that. You could overlap them and have a better understanding of how it looks like. And then it scales. You can have thousands of people watching the map at the same time, and it still works. Again, we use some standard here. So you can have data, geodata in format of KML, GeoRSS, all type of geodata that people know of. So that allows you to put some data on a map and visualize it. And here's an example of how that's useful. Just after Sandy, I'm sure lots of you were in the city, it was a big mess, and we didn't know what was open. Are they like gas stations? What are like the pharmacies and the hotels if you have no place to be? So the Office of Emergency Management in New Jersey put together a list of all the businesses that were open. And they put that as a PDF on their website. And you're like, that's useful. So if you know your own latitude, longitude, and parse that file, you might know what's near you. So how much do you do of that? But this information is key. It was a very rich piece of information. So we took it and we put it on a map. You just put that along, and here you can visualize what are like the gas station near you. But then quickly you say, okay, the gas station was open 12 hours ago, but now does it has gas? Because again, bad information is worse than no information. If we tell you there's a gas station that is open here and you go there and there's nothing available, then it's worse than not knowing that there was something. So without who know better what type of information, if there's gas or no, than people in the station. So we allowed people here to update directly the map and add a comment if they thought there was gas or no. And so crowdsourcing that information. And while we were doing that, we heard about another map that was created by some students in New Jersey that created this Mapler map. So these are the students. They were in a room, and they were with their laptop and their phone calling all gas stations and updating some maps. But their maps had less visibility because they didn't have the visibility that Google had. But because we use the same standards, then we told them, hey, if you want, we can just put your data that is much better than our data right now on the map so that more people can see it. So we put their Mapper gas station on our map. It was like 2 clicks done. But then in there, people still could comment on that information. So then people commented, sometimes say, oh, actually, this is closed. And then we would send that information back to the students in New Jersey, to the Mapper. So we take their data, we display them, we collect more data, we send back to them, all of that because we speak the same language, the same standards, and our systems are open. The final product I want to talk about is the main two, Person Finder and Crisis Map, are usually used after a crisis situation. How to help people recover. But what if we could tell people ahead of time to help them prepare, having an alerting system? You have on TV, you have the little banner when there's something happening that is here on radio, but what about the internet? What would be great if the internet could tell you there's something going on right now where you are or based on what you're planning to do? And what if there would be some standard that express these alerts? It happens that there is such a standard, something called the Common Alerting Protocol, CAP. It's been developed by thousands of emergency managers as a way to publish their data. It's a simple XML standard where you can specify what is happening, when it will happen, who we should alert, what is the region, like there's a hurricane in New York, so we should warn this particular set of people, and what should they do? Should they evacuate? What to do? So you say, oh, cool, there's like some data that is here in a specific standards. We can do a lot with that. So we decided to take some of this CAP feed, ingest, and then present, and then build this, what we call Google Public Alert, as a way to be this alerting system of the internet. So right now we have this data for a certain number of countries, and if you go to google.org/public alerts, you can see them and see what alerts are happening right now. So we try to make them easier to understand. So reading an XML file is not that. It's hard to get the message across, but then we put the information like that. Like if there's a tsunami, we're going to put the arrival time and put the map what are the places that are at risk. And then we can also try to help people discover that information. Like, for example, on web search, if you search evacuation and we know there's a fire near you, we're going to show the evacuation warning for that particular fire. Or you could say, if you're on your phone, then we could alert you through Google Now. How many people have an Android phone? Okay, and do people have Google Now? A few. So there's like, did you get some of this winter storm warning? Yeah, so that's our team. So the goal here is we have some information. We know, we know where you are, so we can push that to you. So a lot of things are silent, like winter storm warning. We're just going to do a little notification. But if this is a tsunami warning or tornado warning, we might make a noise and wake you up because this is something that you have to do something specific about, and you should know about it. So having this, the hardest part of this is actually getting the data. So we worked on building some tools to help these agencies, usually like government agency, create this data. So we wrote a few open source tools, and you can check some of this URL out to see how it looks like. So what are we doing next? What are our big challenges? We want to be able to automate more of what we're doing so that we can respond to more disaster. Talking about like a Google crisis map, we have to manually create and put some data, and we're working hard to try to make it easier so that we could automatically find some data. Empower more citizens, so more crowdsourcing, better engage the community that is on the ground, that has the best understanding of what's going on around them. These are people that have the information there, that know the best what they need and how to work with them and provide some tools to actually better understand that. And one last thing that we're not doing right now is how do we do with offline? How do we do with people? How do we help people that are not connected to the internet? How do we help people that might not have a phone, that might, country that have low internet penetration? So that's what we're working on. And I want to finish on these slides that if you're interested, there's a lot of communities around crisis, and Crisis Mapper is one that works on how to best create geographical data. There's some hackathon. Random Acts of Kindness is a good example where you can go for a weekend. Or at the Grace Hopper Conference, the Conference for Women in Computing, the Google Crisis Response participate every year in the Open Source Day, where we work on one of our open source tools to try to add features. So thank you. I think I'm David. So if you have any questions, because I rushed a little bit.
Short. Hi. Hi. I was wondering about the person finder. So I understand that privacy is not at the top of your head when you're in a crisis and trying to find somebody or letting somebody know. But what about, like, so when you search, it comes up a list of all the people, you know, how do you approach privacy? Is it a concern, or have you thought about, like, sort of doing a matching thing without having to be able to see everybody's?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, because as you said, during a crisis situation, people don't necessarily have privacy in hand. So they're ready to just give all you're looking for someone. So some people might not realize if they put a lot of information there that it can hurt them. So for example, when you enter some information, there's some information we don't display. We don't display the date of birth, for example. So we don't display it here. There's privacy in terms of between the first version and now, there's been we evolved a lot of things, mainly related to privacy. And actually we work with, there's a consortium working on missing people where there's different NGOs in there. There's the Red Cross, and we work all together on PFIF in particular, and privacy is a big one. So we added for the records to be expired. We also added a way for people to lock a record on Person Finder, so other people cannot add information. If you create it, you can also delete it, because unfortunately, we got some people that did spam Person Finder. After the earthquake in Japan, some people just put wrong comments. And you always have people that will try to abuse the system, but my faith in humanity just got hurt when I saw that, when I saw people putting bad comments, and for whatever reason. So we are working on allowing people to better control their data. So you can actually delete some data. You cannot download the entire data, for example. So we try to do things like this. But that's a big concern, yes. Okay, yes.
So also on the Person Finder, I thought it was really interesting when you were speaking, because I was thinking, well, a lot of people, my name's very common for one, and I know a lot of people have my name. And so I was thinking, gosh, how would you do conflict resolution on something like that? Because I imagine if a family thought that they had found their loved one and then it turned out they hadn't, that there would be so much blowback, and it would be just more hairy than it normally is, because, you make a mistake normally, it's not a big deal, but in a crisis, it kind of affects people in a different way. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so that's some discussions that we had internally where we could say, oh, we can have some cool clustering algorithm to cluster people together. But as you said, the risk if you miscluster people is very big. And we think it's better for people to go over several records. And so you have more description. You just only have the names. So a lot of people would say that person is about that age, and you have black hair or blonde hair, and etc. And so this way you can know if that's the same or not. And this is something that is hard to do automatically. And unless we have something that is 100%, we don't want to take the risk to do that. But otherwise, you can actually use people that will do that manually. So that's in crisis situation, a lot of people volunteer to help. So we actually have a UI where you can mark two things as duplicates manually and say these two are the same. But it's done by a human being and not an algorithm. So,
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. So speaking personally from our experience in Sandy, my friends and I are really technically capable, and we're looking for ways to help. Have you seen do you see this evolving into a coordination point for ways that developers can help either during a crisis or beyond it by building tools or acquiring information, or on the other side, people who need help, being a place to find instead of people, but people who need help?
Yeah, so I think in the past 3-4 years, the ecosystem is changing a lot. So before it was a lot like, oh, the government is on top of things and this organization, and they realize that it's harder and harder to just be everywhere. And people locally, they have a lot of knowledge, and everyone is ready to help. And during Sandy, you had Occupy Sandy was like a great example. They just got organized, and they used like different technology, and all of that just people volunteering and getting together. And so I think more and more, so New York City in particular, they have a sort of task force, I think, and they do regularly some hackathon to try to build some tools and involve the community. So it's still very hard to put all of that together, and because each crisis is different. So there's also the notion of, there's a group here put Crisis Common, and they do some crisis camps, something happens, and everyone gather in a place, and depending on your skill, you can help, and etc. So in that situation, there's a lot of, sometimes you end up doing something that someone else did. Like, it's not the most efficient part, but the point at the end is just to be able to do a task, and if it was done like 2 times, then it's not the end of the world. So there's some community that are growing and growing. So this Crisis Mapper, for example, has a conference every year bringing together people that are doing mapping in crisis. So little by little, there's still what you're talking about, it's almost what is needed where, and the coordination between organizations. It's something that is still a very big struggle. How do we know that there's some water that is needed here, and the Red Cross is going there, but another organization is also going there, and how do you coordinate all of that is something that is still very hard.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for your talk. It was really good. My question is about the offline. You mentioned one of the things that you're tackling now is offline. I come from Kenya, and we had post-election violence in 2007, 2008. Around that time, and Ushahidi did a lot of work during that time, and because a lot of people didn't have access to smartphones at the time and were just using feature phones. They use SMS as a tool to do that, to be able to do that. And I think they worked with Frontline SMS, they're called. Yeah. Have you explored that, and what has your experience been, if so? Yeah,
so that's some discussions we have regularly about how to add SMS. So Person Finder, we actually added, during Yolanda, we added an SMS feature. So we do a lot of sometimes coding on the fly when something happens, when there's a specific need. And Typhoon Yolanda was an example where the internet penetration was not so high, but with the devastation, it was much harder for people to have access to the internet. And so we launched Person Finder, and we added a feature through SMS to Person Finder. So this is something, so it's always how, so this is definitely a use case that we have in mind and how to best use. We also, I personally think that for us, having some APIs and having some local groups know better how to interface the data coming from this API to the local community will almost be the best. You can imagine also radio is big in these places. So having some local groups that will do this bridge in between the two. But I know Ushahidi has been doing amazing work, and it started with the riots in Kenya in 2008. So we don't have necessarily like SMS capabilities for everything, but we try to piggyback as much as we can on existing projects.
Cool. Yeah, and your Frontline SMS is a good API for that. So thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Victoria. Thank you for your talk. I was wondering how, do you manage the teams that work on this, and how is it different to manage a team when there's a crisis situation? Do you, when the stress levels are high, what do you do differently to manage so things are still efficient?
Yes, so that's a good question. Because, there's stress, but when something happens. So in 4 years, it changed a lot. From when we initially created the team, it was something happened. Everyone was running like crazy. We're not organized. We were just coding all over. And now we're much more organized. So for example, we have people on rotation, on pager rotation. So when something happens, it's not the entire team that does something. So you can keep working on writing tools that will help you automate most of the things that you do. Eventually, it would be great if we just have tools and people use directly the tools, and we don't need to do something special when something happens. So we also have people in the team that are they're here because they want to work on crisis response, so they're very dedicated. I'm actually not managing the team. I'm an engineer on the team. And the team grew, so at the beginning, I think that plays well to the team, is people, you do whatever it takes to bring tools or to launch something that will help people. If that means that you have to spend some time manually populating a spreadsheet because that's the only thing that will be possible, then you do it. I think we learned how to manage the stress of working on a topic that is hard. So for me personally, for example, sometimes I just work on, we need to launch Person Finder, we need to enable like some SMS. I don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to the situation on the ground, otherwise that's just gonna disturb me too much. So my husband sometimes tells me, so what happened? And I cannot say, we launched Person Finder, we're doing that. I cannot tell you exactly what's going on the ground. That's some other people on the team that are working on that. But it's a way, I think, also to protect myself. Otherwise, it's kind of, it's some really hard situation to work with. So, and it's a lot of chat, everything goes very fast. So we have a common chat room and everyone jumps in. Oh, and I should have mentioned, we work a lot, so we're a small team, but we work a lot with Google offices all over the world. So for example, for the Philippines, we worked with people from the region. Some people in India help. So each time we work with the local expertise that know what's going on the ground, we bring the technological side and we discuss together. Even if we never met in person, there's some people, we spend a lot of time talking to each other. I never met the person. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Hi, thank you for your talk. I thought this was a really interesting talk, and I think it brings a lot of questions to the surface about public versus private. It's different in the case of the international crisis, but particularly for the domestic crises like Sandy, it seems like your team and Google are filling a void where the public sector has fallen short because they don't seem to be up to date on technology and using it for good purposes. And that's great for now. There are some conflict of interest in the way, right? Do we want government to do this? Do we want Google to do this? I'm sure your team and the company has the best interest in mind, but I feel like I sort of want government to do this, but I'm also aware that they are not even close to being able to do that right now. And I was wondering what your feelings were on that, if you think about that, and if Google is working with any public sector organizations. Yeah. So
that's a very good question. And yes, we're working a lot with the public sector. So we're working a lot with FEMA. We're working, like for public alerts, we get alerts feed from government agencies. So we work with NOAA. So we work with, like in Japan, the local government agency that provide this warning. And so each time we develop either a new tool or had new type of data, it's with them. And so it's really like a partnerships. And we talk about crisis map. This is more a tool that they could use to put their data. So for example, the state of Florida has a preparedness crisis map that is always here, and that they put data on it when something happens. And that's why also most of our tools are open source. So this is something that if you want to run your own crisis map, you can run your own crisis map. If you want to run your own Person Finder, you can. And I think that's very important to keep that open. But yeah, it's these discussions about how much do you rely on a private company for some information like that is could be done by government agencies.
Hi, my name's Corinne Kircher. I was actually born in Haiti. I've been here most of my life, and the Google response to the earthquake was very, very heartwarming, because I know a lot of the few people we were able to reach initially felt that maybe the world forgot them, and I would say, no, you have no idea how much people are trying to do whatever they can to assist. In any case, my question has to do with how can you enable people to sort of help put on the map crises that are not yet in the news. So for example, if there's some low-level thing brewing in a country where there's unrest and things are happening, how do you kind of enable that? And I know you part of your work is collaborative with various governments to give you information. So if you're dealing with a regime like North Korea, where there are a lot of things now that are coming to the surface, but if there's a way to enable those people who know what's going on and there's just not a lot of visibility to the problem? How do you enable them to connect? And is there a plan to help people like that surface it to those of you who make the final decision to bring it to the crisis map?
Yes. So, I mean, that's a good question. And in particular, if I can say that it's more like political crisis. How can we help in terms of political crisis? And we see, for example, that's something that we talked a lot during the Arab Spring, after, in Egypt and then in Libya. And this is something that is, I know personally was hard because like, we should be able to help. But something like Person Finder, you could say, we discussed with the Red Cross at the time, could we launch Person Finder in Egypt just when the riots started and some people disappeared? You have to keep in mind about how much it helps. So launching Person Finder will just have a list of all the people that went to the demonstrations and people are looking for them. They might put their phone number, what you said before, they might just put all their private information out there, but this is public information, so you don't know who is going to be able to use it. So it's really hard to, in terms of political crisis, to do something and not necessarily pick a side. So in that case, we can support people that want to use the tool because they're open source. So we can help them bring up some tools, but usually we don't get involved in this situation, even if it's frustrating. And I think that's going to be
sorry guys.
Last question. Sorry, but I'm going to come to the reception afterwards, so feel free to just grab me and ask me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much.